on the line with us is Greg Palast, one of the finest investigative reporters in the world. We're an investigative reporter at BBC News and The Guardian, the author of his latest book, Billionaires and Ballot Bandits. His film, Vultures and Vote Wrestlers, is now available on DVD. GregPalast.com is the website. Greg, welcome back to the program.
Glad to be with you, Tom.
It's always great having you. I was the headline for this piece, and I'm not sure if this was your headline or if this was a sign, put in over a Democratic Underground. But it's what stopped me. It caught my attention. It says Bernie Sanders is the only white guy who showed up. Tell me this story. This is fascinating.
Okay, in 2004. First of all, after the 2000 race, in the 2000 race for BBC and Guardian, I discovered that Katherine Harris had removed tens of thousands of black folk from the voter rolls, calling them, these black men, criminals, felons who couldn't vote. Every single one of the 94,000 people, about 56,000 black men, lost their vote. Everyone innocent, and that's what elected George W. Bush. The black Congressional Caucus didn't want this to happen again, and I just discovered a second new trick called voter caging, where they were wiping out the Republicans in Florida and in other states at Karl Rove's direction. We're wiping out more black voters. So the Congressional Black Caucus held an emergency meeting in 2004 in the middle of the election to talk about these new racial voter suppression tricks, wiping out black folk. And they invited, of course, the entire Congressional Black Caucus showed up at their headquarters in Washington. And they invited the rest of Congress to show up. And the single lone member of the Congressional White Caucus that showed up was Bernie Sanders. And he spent a long time talking to me about these issues of voter suppression, of racial voter suppression. And he stayed right on top of it. What's amazing to me, by the way, and so now you have this odd thing where Bernie Sanders is somehow being accused of not being able to communicate with black voters. He was practically a honorary member of the Congressional Black Caucus. He was always there. It wasn't just that he showed up for that one meeting with me. He's always been arm in arm. And even before he was a congressman, of course, he was part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, John Lewis's organization.
Back in the 60s.
So he goes way back. Now, I'm not pumping for Sanders. I don't endorse candidates. I'm a journalist, but I wanted to correct the record because this is wacky. And I got to tell you that of the other members of the Congressional White Caucus, Hillary Clinton was definitely Senator Clinton at that time, had just been elected a couple of years earlier, and she was nowhere to be seen on this issue. In 2000, she got elected, and during the theft of the vote by Katherine Harris and Jeb Bush for Brother George in 2000, we could not get the attention of the White House and of the Clinton Justice Department to take action and to make an issue the fact that Bush was going to be declared president on the basis of removing black voters.
In Florida, specifically by Jeb.
Specifically, it was ordered, by the way. I have documents showing that the hit was ordered by Jeb. I not only discovered the purge, but that I got further documents from insiders in Jeb Bush's office, workers of color who didn't like what they saw, this kind of lynching by laptop that was being conducted by Jeb and Katherine Harris. And they gave me the documents showing that Jeb himself had ordered the hit. Amazing. That nice smiling guy.
So back in 2000, Jeb Bush knocks 90,000 people off the voting rolls, suspected Democrats in Florida, just in time for the election, about 60,000 of them African-American men, which gets his brother within a couple hundred votes of being able to steal the election. It turns out, as we know, from a year later, when the New York Times and whatnot, when they actually counted the ballots, that Al Gore actually won the vote in Florida. We now know that. And George W. Bush was an illegitimate president. And the publisher of the New York Times says, well, we sort of buried the lead on that in the 17th paragraph in 2012, in 2002, in November 2002, when the tabulation was done, because it was right after 9/11 and we didn't want to discredit the Bush presidency during a time of crisis. But I'm curious, Greg, you reported on this election fraud. And I know that there were some lawsuits around it. It has now been 15 years. What's the status of those efforts to make that right?
You know what? They're still playing games with removing black men as felons. Hillary Clinton finally made the point. She finally said that the election of 2000 was stolen. She said that for the first time this year, 16 years later. I'm glad that she's figured that out.
She said that.
And she said, and we will never forget. I said, well, it seems like she just remembered. I didn't forget. Neither did the Congressional Black Caucus or Bernie Sanders. Again, I'm not pumping for Bernie. I'm just trying to correct the record here.
Right.
I should also say that in 2004, with this new game called caging, that, again, the Democrats were missing in action on that. You'd have to wonder why. There was a split. I actually met with John Edwards and Jesse Jackson. And Edwards was fuming mad about a third set of steals, too. You know, when you talk about the count in Florida, there were 189,000 ballots disqualified in the 2000 race in Florida. You know, they make fun of hanging chads, but that means someone tried to punch through that ballot and mark it for Al Gore. And when I say Al Gore, your chance of your ballot being thrown in the garbage was 900% higher if you were black than if you were white. That was the finding of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. 900% higher if you were black. So you tell me who won the election. Bush won officially by 537 votes. And yet all these black votes thrown in the garbage can. It's called spoilage. Right. And then you had the purge of the black voters. Then you had this caging of the black voters. I mean, you have this huge, like I say, lynching by laptop.
And now Kris Kobach is doing this in Kansas. He's running this whole nationwide version of what Jeb did.
That's right. I'm in the middle of, I can't tell you all the details of investigation, but for BBC, Al Jazeera, and others, and Rolling Stone, I've been on top of that, of the latest game by Kris Kobach called Interstate Crosscheck, which threatens, and I'm telling you, it's going to knock out 1 million voters. I would like to see what's going to happen here. Obviously, Bernie Sanders is on top of that. Hillary Clinton is making noises because she realizes that she needs those votes that are normally thrown in the garbage can. Bill Clinton himself told me that they were going to get on this issue, and then there was a couple of years ago, and there was a long silence. He actually sought me out at a gathering.
So is the NAACP in Florida still suing the state over this? And couldn't, if that suit is still alive, couldn't some motion in that lawsuit over the next 6, 8, 9 months, if Jeb maintains his ability to be a candidate for the Republican presidency, devastate the Jeb Bush presidential possibilities?
Well, I mean, telling the truth on him, we assume has some effect on the election. We don't know yet. But I'll tell you this. NAACP, after I broke my story about the fake felon purge in Florida, sued Katherine Harris and Jeb Bush. They actually wrote apology letters and sent apology letters to the tens of thousands of black men who lost their vote. They're kind of laughing because I guess they wrote the letters while they were at the inauguration. But like, for example, one of the guys who lost his vote illegally, a Gulf War veteran named Willie Steen. So they sent him an apology letter. Then we tried to vote again in 2004. They had him back on the criminal felon list, and the guy's never had a parking ticket. This is, in other words, the game is continuing on subtly. Charlie Crist, who was the Republican governor of Florida, said that one of the reasons why he was pushed out of the Republican Party, and now he switched to be Democrat, the reason he was pushed out of the Republican Party is that he refused to hunt down and remove black voters.
Amazing. Greg Palast, you can read all about it at gregpalast.com, GREGPALAST.com. His new his film Vultures and Vote Rustlers is now out in DVD. Hey, Greg, thanks a lot for dropping by today.
Always the best. Thanks.
Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back. What does this portend for the next election? The odds have always been tough, when you're going up against billionaires and ballot bandits.